Professor Michael D. O'Brien has been associated with the college from the earliest days. His wife Sheila was a founding board member and is still on the board of directors today. Michael O'Brien is the author of 30 books of various genres, 15 of which are widely acclaimed novels. His work is widely reviewed in both secular and religious media in North America and Europe. Mr. O'Brien's essays on faith and culture have appeared in international journals such as Communio, Catholic World Report, the Chesterton Review, and others. For 7 years, he was the editor of the magazine Nazareth Journal. He's an honorary fellow of the Baylor University Honors College. Mr. O'Brien has given hundreds of public talks and lectures throughout Europe and North America, and has frequently appeared as a guest on television programs in several nations. Since 1970, he has also worked as a professional artist and has dedicated his talents to the service of sacred art. Michael O'Brien lives in Barry's Bay, Ontario. He and his wife Sheila have 6 children and 15 grandchildren. Please welcome Mr. Michael D. O'Brien.
Very warm welcome to you all. I recognize almost every face. You're very dear to us. We, the ragtag group of people who were there at the beginnings of this mysterious work called Our Lady Seat of Wisdom College. Can you hear me? This sounds very strange. Feels okay? Normal? All right. I'd like to go back to the very beginnings, where the germination of the concept of Mater Ecclesiae Study Center, which eventually bore fruit in Our Lady Seat of Wisdom Academy, which eventually has borne fruit now in recent years in our full-fledged accreditation as a university-level college. It began with very, very small beginnings, like a mustard seed, one might say. I remember seeing so clearly in our kitchen, a group of us were sitting around having coffee, my wife and 3 other mothers, and a couple of young men, George Danish, and James Anderson Jr., and these incredibly fervent, wonderful, wonderful women, one of whom has made me promise not to mention her name, a person I'm very close to, so I'm not going to mention her name. Helen Fritz. Were the other women there that day? Sheila, help me. My memory's really going. Maria Henry was there. There were three or four mothers having coffee with my wife. Anyway, we began to lament. I think I was making the coffee, keeping the fire going, and everyone was kind of grieving that all of us had very small single incomes and a large number of children. We're all totally open to life. Thriving, noisy households. But then we were faced with the challenge because most of us had the teenage years approaching or already begun. In our case, it had begun. We could not afford to send our children to a college, a university. We could not afford it. Especially to a university where we would know that reliable, solid teaching would be given to our young people. We are their first teachers. We have a responsibility to discern these questions. We had watched very beloved, very devout young people leave the valley here, go off to secular universities, come back with on occasion disordered lives, and often without faith. They had lost their faith under the power and the influence of secular professors out there in modernity or post-modernity or post-modernity or whatever it is now, whatever the current religion is. It really challenged us to say, how are we going to bring our children through, especially at the ages where the big questions arise in their hearts, the big existential questions, as well as the questions of faith. How can we feed them good food? Who should we entrust them to? Well, the conversation came around to one of the mothers, who shall remain unnamed, saying, why don't we make our own college? And the other mothers and the young fellas, they all said, yeah, let's make our own college. Let's do it. The young, let's go. And then we said, but how? And so began a long process, or maybe not so long, of beginning novenas and prayers about this whole question. However, on that key, crucial morning, one of the mothers said, I think we should trust in the Lord with our whole hearts. This is what our whole faith tells us. This is what Scripture tells us. Trust in the Lord with your whole hearts and do not rely on your own understanding. Trust in Him. You will not be disappointed. So let us do the impossible thing, the unthinkable thing. We, a bunch of lay people, weak, powerless, without money, let's just ask God to do the impossible. And someone raised the question, yeah, but when? And another person said, now, let's do it now. So someone opened his wallet, took out $5, that's all there was in that wallet, and slapped it down on the kitchen table and said, here, let's begin. So purses and wallets opened, and gradually the money just poured in. It poured in all over the table. There was $25 on the table. Believe me. And that amount of money was a sacrifice for all of us. So I do not want to make the story of origins sound too nostalgic, but I think there's a crucial point here. The history of this work of God, this movement of God, to build this very fragile little teaching institution out of hope, out of faith, out of the deep, deep waters of love, the desire for fruitfulness, the desire to form our children in a way that would send them forth into the world with faith, hope, and love in their hearts and ideas in their heads, willing to engage the world, not hide from it, not be assimilated into the spiritus mundi or the spiritus diabolus, which so often lurks behind that spiritus. To send them forth as our most precious gifts, our children, into the world, to give life to the world. This was our hope, and we were powerless to make it happen. Well, the study center thrived basically in the living rooms of a number of our families. Our living room for a couple of days a week. On occasion, the Beklinski family's barn, their hayloft. The Hammond families, Joseph Hammond's law office 2 days a week, and so forth. And often the back of a pickup truck when the weather was clement out on the edge of Algonquin Park, reading the great classics. the philosophy, the doctors of the church, the magisterial teaching. James Anderson, George Dinish, seated over there, Luc Dauvin, and very shortly after these men began to teach their courses in living rooms amidst much hubbub of large families and noise, along came our first MA, John Paul Meenan, who, even as we speak, is delivering the keynote speech down the road. He's not here, so I would like to just indulge in a little well-earned praise. This man has poured out his whole life for the college, but not necessarily just to build an institution, but for the sake of the young, for the sake of a generation, for the sake of those yet unborn. John Paul Meenan has taught with a vivacity, an intelligence, a determination, and great jollity, not unmixed with his Celtophilic personality, his Robbie Burns days, his minor attachment to the old crater, his love of music. And every year he has for decades taken our students on an annual pilgrimage in March to the Shrine of the Canadian Martyrs, and especially to the site of St. Jean de Brébeuf's and Father Lalemant's martyrdom. Some of you students have been on that pilgrimage, and you know how powerfully affecting it is. Here's the blood of the martyrs, the seed of the church. Here, so many of us prayed, so many of you prayed that the Lord would bring about a restoration, that we would move forward. We have been called conservatives, we have been called liberals by others. What are we? What are we really? We are a timeless people. We are people who live in the heart of the church. We're beyond those political categories, and God willing, we will remain beyond those categories, which do not apply to the body of Christ and never can. We live in the heart of the church. We love the teachings of the church as a living tradition, not a dead letter, but a living word that gives life, a word that gives life. But all of this, to give life, as any parent knows, to give life costs. It costs in terms of sacrifice. And from the very beginning, this college has been built on a continual pattern of sacrifice. The phrase from the Old Testament comes to mind. Only enough manna for one day at a time. That has been the Lord's pattern with us. Occasionally surprise gifts that get us through really bad patches. But for the most part, He wants to build on a foundation of faith. Faith is the most precious gift within us. From faith comes love, comes the maturing in love, comes the fruitfulness of love. I'm thinking of some of the more heartbreaking sacrifices that have occurred. Father Kenneth, you remember Father Kenneth, one of our early graduates, went on to be a priest. And he said in later writings, in writing about the college in an article, he said, my path to the priesthood was crucially dependent on the time I spent at Our Lady's Seat of Wisdom College. Father Kenneth was murdered in 2014, if I recall correctly, 2014, when a deranged man broke into his rectory, and Father Kenneth died defending his pastor. Father Ken was the assistant assistant pastor. There have been other priests who are alumni of our college. I think Father Jerry, you were mentioning 5, but there are more. And there's a larger 5 diocesan priests and members of orders. There are a larger number of vocations of women to the consecrated life, religious life. There are many, many other great fruits, beautiful fruits that are ongoing, not least of which is the very large number of marriages that have come out of this college, and the tremendous number of what I think among ourselves we call our grandchildren, our college's grandchildren, these beautiful little souls. These two are fruits. But I come back to our central theme, our fundamental theme. Fruitfulness is built upon sacrifice, the laying down of our lives for the good of others. Sometimes this costs everything. And I'm thinking now also of Paul Saunders. I was very interested to hear what you said, Archbishop. Thanks for telling us. And Janine Liu, who died tragically on the lake. Some very interesting things happened around their death. The day before they died, Professor Meenan gave a talk on the 4 last things. And the last words of his class were, "Now remember, do not neglect confession. Remember, we have only so many heartbeats in our lives. We could die tomorrow." Paul and Janine died the next day. Now, I recall the night before going to confession at St. Hedwig's. There were only 3 penitents there that evening. There was one sinner, and one real sinner, and a couple of really good young people ahead of me. Paul and Janine were standing in front of me. They were next in line for confession. And I remember thinking to myself, it's just crystal clear in my mind now, looking back, wow, what an awesome place the Academy is. How wonderful it is. You couldn't find 2 more different personalities or temperaments. Janine Liu was this profoundly deep, one might say, introverted, but in a very healthy way, contemplative soul. Very beautiful, beautiful young lady from Vancouver, Chinese Canadian from Vancouver, was discerning and praying about entering the contemplative life. Very quiet. Paul Saunders was the whole other end of the spectrum of personality. He was an extrovert. He was a dynamic, dramatic character, always had people laughing in the hallways. I think that night, he was wearing his orange jumpsuit and his zebra-striped running shoes as he was waiting in the lineup. I thought, there we are. Both of them loved the Lord. Both of them very involved in the pro-life movement. They were the founders of the pro-life group at the Academy. Here is the universality of the Church. Here is man's home. This is where we all belong. This is where we can all live, in the heart of the Church. Our task has been at the Academy to not only say that as theory, but to incarnate it, to teach philosophy, theology, history, literature, science, and so forth, languages, not as dead letters, but as living words. living words that give life. I'm thinking also of, I can't help but mention Christopher and Wendy Zakshevsky over there in the corner, looking quiet and humble. Christopher's wonderful teaching spell that everyone fell in love with. He taught Latin for a number of years. Brilliant poet and a brilliant master of language in his own right, editor of 2 magazines. But their beautiful hearts were very visible every autumn when their first influx of first years, as well as the second and third years, would arrive. There would be a walking pilgrimage from St. Hedwig's all the way to St. Mary's in Wilno, where the Zakshevskys live. And they would annually host this magnificent banquet of Polish cuisine, which they labored on for days and days and days. It was their act of love. It was their act of love. And it said to the young, welcome. Be at home here. Be at home. So many other faces, so many other people I could point out. Not a one of you has failed to give and give and give without counting the cost. All of you. If we begin to name names, we'll be here, and you won't be able to have Christine Schinken's ball. In summation, let me say, I see, in terms of the architecture of what has happened here, the form of it, the emerging form of it. There was the short, brief foundation period. And now, for the last almost 20 years, we've been in a building period. In the building period, where infrastructure has become more complex, necessary, and so forth. Now we are facing, with our full-blown credibility as a real university, we're facing a future in which we must ask the basic questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What are we for? Where are we going? And whom do we serve? Throughout these 3 stages, the most crucial thing, the most living thing, has been our mission. That is to serve the young, to feed them good food, to help them to learn to think and discern rightly, to open their lives to the spiritual life if they have not already, to help them to know that they are beloved of God, that God is present, to help them discern their own vocations. That is our task, our mission. We are not here to build yet another structure, even one dipped in holy water. We are here to be a living work of the Lord. Over and over again, He has shown His hand most gently and powerfully. So many of our leaps forward have occurred without planning on human part, on the feasts of Our Lady and the feasts of our Joseph, our Saint Joseph, our beloved Saint Joseph, foster father of our little college, our mother, Our Lady Seat of Wisdom. They have their hands on this place. They invoke grace for us daily. They ask us, not just our students, they ask each of us, staff, faculty, benefactors, all those associated with us, pastors, they ask us to grow. They ask us to be the students as we teach, to learn. What would the Lord show us in these last 25, 26 years? He would show us that He is faithful. He is ever faithful. He will never disappoint if we give Him everything. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux said once something so beautiful. I often repeat it to myself. Where everything is given, nothing is lacking. So while it would be very, very, very nice if a millionaire or a billionaire should spot us out here in the wilderness and say, there's a place where I can invest. That would be wonderful. It may happen, God willing, if it's His will. Or He may continue the long process of formation, of shaping the clay, shaping us into a vessel, and those who will come to teach, labor here, study here, into vessels, by teaching us to rely on Him. The young are our mission. They will never cease to be our mission. Let the love of Christ live within us and bear fruit in their lives. So much more to say. It's like trying to compress an ocean into a little cup. Turn to Him. Never cease to pray for Him, to Him. Never cease to ask for all we need. He doesn't promise us a comfortable life. He never has. It's never been comfortable here. He doesn't promise us a safe life. But He promises us a beautiful life. And it is a beautiful work that He has made happen here. So, let us respond totally to grace, that we may bear fruit that will last. So thank you. Thank you for listening.